Good morning. I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church online. Almost 500 years before Jesus was born, there was a Greek philosopher named Zeno of Ela. He gained fame for posing certain paradoxical questions that challenged the theories of the modern-day mathematicians and philosophers. His most famous dilemma was called the paradox of motion. A simplified version of the paradox is this. You make the decision that you're going to walk across the street. You have the ability to walk across the street. You can see the other side of the street. You have the means to get there. You understand how far you have to travel. But you're required to take a half step every time you move forward. So if your first step is 3 feet in length, your next step can only be 18 inches. Your third step would have to be 9 inches. Fourth step would be 4.5 inches, and so on. Eventually, there's going to come a time when you're making microscopic movements. While you always have the possibility of constant forward motion, the truth is you're never going to arrive at your destination. Zeno's paradox has us always has us moving forward, seemingly making progress, but we never get anywhere. And while this morning you may have never heard of Zeno or his paradox, I believe that you are probably very familiar with the sentiment. Maybe this morning you find yourself trying to move forward, but you're going so slowly that you just feel like you're spinning your wheels. Maybe you're wondering if you're ever going to arrive, if you're ever going to make it to where you want to be. It seems to me that in all of human time, we've been stuck in a version of Zeno's paradox. Most certainly in our text for this morning, we're going to find people in a time of waiting. In Matthew chapter 3, we read, "Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, 'I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?' Jesus replied, 'Let it be so now. It's proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness.' Then John consented. And as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending on him like a dove and lighting on him. A voice from heaven said, 'This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased.'" This is the baptism of Jesus found in all 4 Gospels. In Luke's account, we find out that everyone was expecting the Messiah to come soon, and they were eager to know whether John might be the Messiah. The people are crowded on the banks of the Jordan River. They're waiting, they're hoping, they're longing to see the Messiah. These people knew the paradox of trying to move forward, but feeling like you're stuck in a time of waiting, living in expectation, waiting for anything to happen. For generations, these people had been moving, but it's happening so slowly that they never arrived to where they wanted to be. They might have placed their frustrations at the feet of the Roman government because they're being oppressed by Caesar and the Herods. It's true, the Roman government had no real aspirations to help the people. The Jews were occupied people living in an occupied land, ruled by murderers and tyrants. But it's not just the Romans who had caused this great paradox to happen in their lives. Matter of fact, John says a few verses earlier that the people who were gathered on the riverside, he told them, it's useless to try to hold on to hope based on being a descendant of Abraham, because Abraham's descendants are a dime a dozen. The reason that heaven felt closed off to them, John says that's because you've allowed your relationship with God to become nothing more than dead wood ready for the fire. Ever since the Garden of Eden, we've tried to move forward based on our own intellect, talent, power. You remember back in Genesis chapter 3 how Adam and Eve made the choice to chase after knowledge, only to discover that having your eyes opened is not the epiphany that they expected. Knowledge wouldn't move them forward. So eventually the people try to establish laws. They hope that we'll finally be able to get what we want, what our souls long for, if we can make enough rules and get everybody on the same page. And you know the story. They got plenty of rules, and lots of regulations only to realize that they couldn't follow them all. Even the laws that were written on stone by the hand of God himself. So they took what they thought was the next step forward. You know, if we could get a strong, wise, compassionate king, then we would finally arrive to where we want to be. But the first king was a failure. The second one was better, but he still doesn't help them move forward, and neither could his son or his grandson or any of the other kings that divided the nation and chased after idols. Establishing those kings resulted in the slavery of the people and the loss of the northern empire. Can you see how they're living out Zeno's paradox? Every step they take forward just puts them in a bigger mess. They thought knowledge was the answer, but knowledge failed them. They thought rules and regulations were the answer, but rules failed them. They believed the government was the answer, only to discover that the government failed them. The people of God have this history of movement and change that unfortunately doesn't do anything but adds to their pain and captivity. They're searching for heaven. They believe that they were moving towards heaven only to find disappointment piled on top of disappointment. I think if we're honest this morning, we might admit that we understand their disappointment a little more than we'd like to. We can identify with the weary frustration of people who gathered on the shores of the Jordan River looking for the next step, hoping and praying that the next thing we do will get us a little closer to heaven. You understand the failure of human knowledge, human rules, and human government. You understand that those things don't bring the peace and the security that we long for. We're familiar with Zeno's paradox in our own lives, endlessly moving but never getting anywhere. Much like those people that gathered on the riverbank, we stubbornly refuse to admit that we have a problem. I mean, we know that we're powerless to actually do anything to make our situation better, but we tell ourselves, we lie to ourselves, we say we're moving forward, and our progress is so slow it feels like we're just standing still. We encourage ourselves looking for the next big thing. I mean, if we just get a little farther, we'll be there, right? And we never stop to acknowledge the reason for our predicament. We forget that our issue is found in our failure to accept our own brokenness and frailty. Jesus talks about this problem in John 3:6 when he says, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. I mean, we're broken people, born of flesh. We're powerless to create anything from within that's not already there. In other words, you can only make dinner with the ingredients you have on hand. And for generations, we've been trying to make pancakes without flour, eggs, or milk. We're longing for solutions that are greater than our human brokenness. So we need to look for something greater than human knowledge or rules or politics. I think we need to stop looking on the shore and pay attention to what's happening in the water. Because it's in the water that everything changes. But as Jesus was coming out of the waters, he looked up and saw the sky split open. The Spirit of God descended upon him like a dove, and the voice echoed in the heavens. You are my Son, my beloved one, and I am very pleased with you. Mark wants us to know that when Jesus is standing in the water, something radically new occurred. God rips open the heavens and makes this beautiful proclamation. The sky is split in two. This is not some small window into heaven giving us a glimpse of our Father as he watches his Son. At this very moment, the curtain is pulled back and John's able to see into the throne room of God. I mean, just a moment before, the only thing John could see were trees and grass, people standing on a sandy riverbank, water, Jesus. Now the veil's lifted and John sees a different reality altogether. He's able to see the Father in his throne room, the Spirit descending like a dove, the Son standing in front of him. The actual word used in this passage is only found one other time in Mark's gospel. It's found in Mark 15:38, and it describes how God rips the thick curtain in the temple from the top to the bottom at the moment Jesus dies. That same curtain that was supposed to keep people from getting close to God, the curtain that divided the holy place from the most holy place, at Christ's baptism, we find God once again ripping the curtain, pulling it back so there's no more separation between us and Him. God intentionally closed the gap at the moment that He claims His Son. The promise that we've waited for generations is finally here. Jesus was flesh and blood. He took on all of the weaknesses of being a human. Yet that morning in the Jordan River, humanity takes a giant step forward. I mean, Jesus always existed. He spoke and created everything that exists. But that night that He was born in the manger, He gave up all of His rights and His privileges. Somehow He emptied Himself of His power and grew up like all the other kids in His town, with one major exception. He never sinned. There was never a time that He disobeyed His parents. He never acted selfishly, never said something out of anger, never threw a temper tantrum because He lost His patience. In His frail human nature, Jesus was perfect. And when the time was right, He comes out to be baptized, to be recognized as a fulfillment of the promise that God made years ago. Standing in that water, God claims Jesus as a son, and that makes all the difference for you and me. You see, when God claims Jesus, He's claiming that Jesus is fit to be our Savior. The Father's claiming that the Son can complete the mission, fulfill the promise that He made generations ago through the prophet Isaiah when we read, "Now this is what the Lord says, He created you, people of Jacob. He formed you, people of Israel." He says, don't be afraid because I've saved you. I've called you by name and you're mine. That's the hope that we long for. That's what we've been trying to save ourselves, only to realize time and time again we can't save ourselves. We can't get away from the fact that after all of that movement, all of that effort, all of that trying, we're still stuck in the same place. So our Father speaks into our problem. The same God that spoke to Israel and spoke to Jesus in the Jordan continues to speak to us. He calls out to us in our brokenness and sin, don't be afraid because I have saved you. I've called you by your name. You're mine. I really like that word mine. I'm not sure there's a more possessive word in the English language. But it's not just possessive, is it? It shows important. It shows value. We only claim something as mine when we value it. It's something that we desire, something we hold dear, something that's precious. The prophet says that God sees you and declares that you're dear to Him. He makes the same claim over you that He makes to His Son Jesus. I have called you by name. You are mine. Let that sink in for just a minute. You've been claimed by the one who created the heavens and the earth and everything that's in it. You've been claimed by the unbelievable creative God who thought about waterfalls, volcanoes, rainbows, and platypuses. You've been claimed by the one whose love surpasses anything that you can ever imagine or hope to receive anywhere else. You've been claimed by the one who's both mighty and powerful and yet tender and compassionate enough to know each and every one of us by name. God says, you are mine. There's another claim being made in the Jordan River, though. When Jesus is baptized, He's not only hearing the claim of God on His life, but Jesus is also making a claim of His own. He's claiming that His life belongs to God. It's the same claim that we made at our baptisms. At our baptism, we claimed our place in the family of God. We accept His gift of love and His welcome at His table. These are huge claims, and the only way that we can ever achieve these claims is by being invested in a community of faith, to live among other people who are claimed by God and make the same claim that their lives belong to Him. In the same way that Jesus' baptism in the Jordan was not about him, in reality, our baptism is not just about us. Baptism is about community, the family of God that gathers at the table to remember and experience God's love. We're a community of people who rejoice in the salvation offered by God. And to paraphrase the great Jonathan Edwards, we acknowledge the only thing that we have contributed to the beautiful gift of salvation is the sin that makes it necessary. We trace our reason for gathering at the table back to the water of the Jordan and the water of our own baptisms. We recognize that it's through the blood and the water that we can be a community, claimed by God as his beloved children, called by name. We claim the promise of God found in the bread and in the cup. So as we make our way to the table this morning, I want you to know the voice is still here. The voice is always here. When life becomes difficult, when we hurt and fail one another, when we lose someone we love, when faith gets hard, when work is worrisome, when we face an uncertain future, when we lift our hands to the heavens in fear or in pain, the voice is always here repeating, "Don't be afraid, because I've saved you. I've called you by name, and you're mine." And that makes all the difference in the world. This morning, the voice, his voice, invites you to once again join him at the table. And it's my hope and my prayer that as you gather at the table this morning, you're able to hear the voice of God, the voice that calls you by name, that says you are his. I hope you have a wonderful time of communion this morning, and that you never forget that you're loved and wanted and claimed. Have a great week. I look forward to seeing you very soon.